Ravi Kapur. Welcome to a special edition of The Public Interest. We've been covering the Republican National Convention. We're joined today by David Dhillon, who's been a mayor of El Centro, California, served on the city council for a number of years, and he's involved now with a group called Indian Voices for Trump. It's a national consortium of Indian Americans that are supporting the president. David, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So tell us about this group, first and foremost. Obviously, a lot of folks are paying attention to the Trump-Biden race. You're part of a coalition that's trying to help the president get reelected. How are you guys organizing in this virtual world? This is actually, I think, the first in-person interview that I've done in many, many months. So, and we are being socially distant and trying to take all the right protocols. How are you getting the word out? How are you getting the message out in this new world?
Exactly this way. It's all done through social media. We have our weekly and bi-weekly meetings through Zoom, which 6 months ago I didn't even know what Zoom was, and now I'm an expert at it. And so I've gotten an opportunity to meet people from all over the country, the Indian community from all professions, all skill sets. Some of them have been supporters of the Republican cause for decades, and some are newly in. But yeah, it's been great to listen and learn from the Harmeet Dhillons of the world and so on, who are kind of guiding us and mentoring us and how we can best help in our little corners of the world. And in many ways, it's through sometimes fundraising, but mostly through the digital world and getting the word out and so on. I think the effectiveness of it is going to be those that are very active in the key states that it matters, Pennsylvania, Florida, those kinds of things.
I mean, tell me about engagement, because you're talking about an Indian American community that's spread out all over the country, largely concentrated on the coasts. California really isn't in play. New York is not really in play. New Jersey is debatable, but clearly the big swing states, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, these are the key states that both parties are trying to grab. So how do you message to these specific communities targeting Indian Americans?
Well, I mean, the Indian community in America is 1 to 1.5% of the U.S. population. There are probably a dozen places where it's a higher density. Yuba City, Fresno area is a bigger percentage than 1%. There are pockets in Virginia, Tampa, New Jersey, et cetera, that do. And I think that probably is the way to go. When you need a real civics lesson when it comes to the Electoral College. I would contend that most Americans today, probably most Indian Americans today, just think their vote is going towards a presidential pick and don't really understand the whole concept that you said, California, New York, Texas, et cetera, how Montana and Oklahoma is going to vote, et cetera. So 8 states or so really decide the presidency via the Electoral College. But their vote is very important because you're voting down ticket. You're voting for a congressman, an assemblyman, a school board member, and so on. So going out to vote is essential. So in that sense, the Indian American vote is vital. The most important dynamic of all of our lives is our local politicians, our city councilmen, our school board members, and so on. But when it comes back to presidential politics, yeah, you have to find those zones where the higher propensity of voters in a swing state like Tampa. These rural areas where doctors prevail at 3 to 5% of the population in the state of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those kinds of things. And I think they're doing that. I'm in Southern California where it doesn't prevail as much. And so, but yeah, the experts are doing that. I think these presidential groups they see Indians not just as a fundraising mechanism. They're 1.5% of the population. They're probably maybe less than 1% of the voting population. I think a higher percentage of them in population exists than vote, but a much larger percentage in campaign contributions. And I think now the Trump administration sees it as a viable entity, not just in contributions, but voting blocks.
I mean, that's a great point, because I would say prior to 2016, while there had been some outreach by Democrats and Republicans on a one-to-one basis, I mean, certainly you've been involved in the Republican Party for a long time, we have not seen this real strong effort by both parties to do outreach. And I think President Trump really made his presence felt in 2016. And now here in 2020, both sides have coalitions, Indian Voices for Biden or Trump. Now that you're breaking it down by verticals, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims. We've never seen this kind of outreach, which is incredible for someone like me that's covering it. Tell me about, first of all, your history in politics, your engagement with the Republican Party, and the evolution to where we are today, where both parties are seeking our vote.
Well, I'll start with the end first, and then I'll go back to the history. The Indian community is assimilated very rapidly and is well received by all communities. So when you see sort of the division sometimes, you really don't put Indians in any of the division. They're kind of beloved by all ethnic groups, and they've assimilated into all walks of political life and business life. And so now a little bit of history. In 1985, when I was in my 20s, I'm 58 years old now and I feel very young. But when I was in my 20s, it was myself and 2 other elected officials of any kind of Indian descent in the country. Today, there are school board members, judges, members of Congress, governors. I mean, it's amazing. And now we have vice presidential candidates and congressional candidates, and they're not 100%. I'm not 100% Indian. I'm mixed bloods, and many are half or whatever. And so you see where there's now a real blend. It's very well accepted, and sometimes you have to be reminded that person is Indian. My grandfather's left Punjab in 1917. It took a long time to get here on a boat, and at that time Woodrow Wilson allowed Indians to come to America and declare to fight in World War I. India was one of the few countries that were allowed to do that because they spoke English. Both my grandfathers, Inder Singh Atwal, Ratan Singh Dhillon, were not allowed to join the Army because upon their interview, they were interviewed and asked what they do as a profession, and both were farmers. And the U.S. Army and the government concluded that America needed farmers. But because of their declaration to fight for this country, they were allowed to stay and moved to Southern California, where I'm now 3rd generation there, married Mexican women. And so David Singh Dhillon is a Catholic who's half Indian, half Mexican with some Portuguese also.
And did your grandfathers serve in the military, or no?
They weren't allowed because at the time the mentality of 1917 was, we cannot lose a farmer in the battlefield. You guys are farmers. We need farmers. And so they were allowed to. They were not allowed to, because they were willing to give up their lives. They were allowed to stay in America.
And of course, the part of the country that you're in, this is a very famous part in terms of Asian American political history, Indian American political history. Dileep Singh Sand was the first elected member of Congress coming out of this district that you now live in.
Absolutely. And if you talk to some really old timers from the Imperial Valley, people that are in their 80s and 90s today, they actually remember him as Judge Sand. He was a long-serving judge in Westmoreland, which is a small city in Imperial County where I live. It's a city that touches Mexico and Arizona, desert, very hot climate, farming community. And so he ran and was a judge for a long time, and then became a congressman. Served a short period of time because of health issues. But yeah, that's the history. There's pictures in museums with my grandfathers, Dileep Singh Sand, in the Sikh temple in El Centro, and that's when there were hundreds of them at the time. There's a lot less now in that region, but yeah, Indians were infiltrating politics in a positive way in the 50s. Yeah.
Pretty incredible. And of course, we've also had Dr. Amarjit Singh Marwah, who's been on this program, who was the campaign manager for Dileep Singh Sand, and he told us a little bit about that history, which was incredible, and you can see that in our archives.
Dr. Marwah's fame really was Tom Bradley. Dr. Marwah saw that, he loved that, but he also saw the dynamics of local politics in a magnificent city like Los Angeles. So he and Tom Bradley were the best of friends.
Let me talk to you more about your goals between now and the election. How are you going to try to convince Indian Americans to vote for President Trump? Obviously, we can get into the, President Trump is quite an interesting figure, very divisive in many respects, very popular in others. Indian Americans, by and large, I don't know if the numbers were significant in 2016, but the effort that he's made over the last 4 years has been significant. Going to India earlier this year in the middle of a pandemic, having Howdy Modi last fall, which was an incredible spectacle, 50,000 people, never seen anything quite like it. So there's a lot of folks that are working with you in this coalition who tell us, and we had a gentleman, Dr. Shivangi, who said, well, we're going to get 70% of the Indian American vote to vote for President Trump. Now, the Democrats will counter, almost 80% of Democrats voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. That's a huge swing. What do you actually think will take place?
I think that's there's definitely going to be a huge swing. I don't know if it'll be 70%, but I truly believe that, I don't know that Indians are as partisan. And if you actually talk to them, they're all Republicans. They just don't know it. But most of them register Democrat. But Donald Trump's been a friend of India and Indians for decades. He was doing business in Mumbai with his hotels and his resorts all over the world, India, Dubai, and so on, and definitely in New York. And so he's been a friend to India and understands that world politic and people who've worked with him forever. I think he even named his Jersey casino Taj Mahal. So he's always had that in his heart. So I think folks will do it. Most Indians tend to be more business related, even if they're physicians, and they realize that he's pro-business. So my goals are to get him elected. We're 60 days out from that. And of course, you trickle down, it's holding the Senate, taking back the House. All these things are important, local elections and so on. For the reasons of security and business and the Supreme Court and all these kinds of things. I'm 58 years old, you're younger, but we hear every year that this is the most important election of our lifetime. And I've been hearing that since I was a teenager. I've heard that in 1980 at the Reagan convention in Detroit. But the truth is, I've never said it until now. This really is kind of a pivotal time. And I believe that once Trump is reelected, things will calm down. Because I think what's going to happen is the Democratic Party and the media are going to have their internal civil wars to say, this crap didn't work, we tried and it didn't work, and we're getting left behind. So we better kind of regroup and figure this out, or we're going to be left behind again 4 years from now.
Why don't you answer, though, some of the skeptics, the critics, the folks who are just incensed that President Trump has an absolute legitimate chance of getting reelected, despite what all the polls say. It's neck and neck. The fact of the matter is we do have significant divides. There's a lot of folks that claim President Trump's a racist. You've had more interactions with folks at the highest level than I have. Can you talk to some of these concerns? Because I hear this every single day. I mean, that's the message. Both sides have their messaging, but these are some of the most significant ones that come across saying, why should we reelect this man when we have executive orders that effectively keep Indian immigrants out? We have this huge green card backlog, which is affecting hundreds of thousands of people. You have children who are coming into the country at a young age, and they may age out and get kicked out of the country at 21. Can you speak to some of those issues?
Well, I mean, I think the media initially, right out of the box when he came down that elevator, basically misquoting him, basically elected him. I know for a fact that President Trump cares about one color only, and that's red, white, and blue. And if you get my point. But I
thought you were going to say green.
No, he cares about red, white, and blue. That's the one color he cares about. And when he came down that elevator and the escalator and said, many of the people who come from Mexico, many of them are not good people. Some of them are rapists and drug addicts. He did not say that all Mexicans are rapists and drug addicts. So from the first moment he declares, he was misquoted, and they haven't stopped misquoting him. And I think the American people of all colors get it. He was misquoted from the start, and they went with it, and they figured they can destroy him, and they've empowered him, because most people know that's a bunch of BS. I was a border city councilman. I saw firsthand what comes across the border. I know firsthand what comes across the border now. And folks that are crossing the border illegally are not the best. And so whether it's India, China, Mexico, or any country in the world, he's representing America that says, we're going to set the rules, and I want the best. And so if folks want to run off, if the Democrats make the mistake of making this, he's a racist, they're going to lose again. Most people, I don't care what color you are, you can talk to the Latino Americans, African Americans, you're going to see the highest onslaught of people of color. They like to say that people of color for Donald Trump since maybe George Herbert Walker Bush or Dwight Eisenhower, percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but this will be the highest percentage because you have a new generation of folks that say, I also care about one color and one color only, red, white, and blue.
But when you talk to folks internally and you think about, okay, these are the things that President Trump has accomplished over these last 4 years, and then you see the other side, and you have Joe Biden, who has a long track record in Congress, a likable person by every indicator, and then, of course, you have Kamala Harris, who's a very talented senator of California, who happens to be half Indian, which we've never seen before. It's a different dichotomy in this cycle versus 4 years ago. So tell us about what you guys talk about internally to counter the messaging? Because what are you guys actually concerned about the Democratic Party and the messaging coming from Biden and Harris?
Actually, we haven't discussed much about the opponents. I don't know. I mean, you have two situations where you have I've never met Joe Biden. I've met a lot of Democrats who've been in office for many years. I'm sure he's a nice gentleman. From what I hear, that he's been more anti-immigrant in his legislation and anti-African American and a lot of the stuff he's stood for the last half a century. So I haven't really researched that, but very little of what we talk about is how bad the opponent is. It's really, again, the dynamics of how we get into the Indian American community and promote whatever we can. I believe that it's sort of like what your parents will tell you: do one thing great instead of 10 things not so great. And I think we're focused on everyone is looking at their strength and say, what can I do in my little world here to move the needle? And it's mostly positive for Indians getting the vote out, talking about the business community, talking about the president's role on cutting taxes. And that's kind of the dynamic I see. Now, we still have many more meetings over the next 60 days, and maybe it'll shift. But I believe that I'm kind of waiting to see if a lot of this may shift to the violence that has taken place. But we haven't gotten there yet as a group. Maybe I'll come back and discuss that with you another time. But the pandemic and the violence we haven't got to. It's more or less the mechanics of getting out to the Indian community right now. But we'll maybe before the election we'll have had 10 more of these Zoom meetings, and I could share that with you.
But the reality is here in 2020, Kellyanne Conway is no longer going to be part of the. At least as a White House advisor, she's stepping away. Steve Bannon got a very serious indictment from the Southern District of New York. So you have two of the most pivotal figures in 2016 that helped President Trump get elected. They seemingly will not be a part of this stretch run. Then you have all the folks that inner circle, whether it's Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, others that have been indicted or convicted. I mean, does that concern you? I mean, you were an elected official to have a group. I mean, you are generally the company you keep. And if you have folks around you that are getting indictments and are getting convicted for, crime, and the Indian American community is a community that generally likes law and order. They want laws. They want they're law-abiding people. They play by the rules. And President Trump has had a whole bunch of people around him that have been rule breakers. How do you counter that message?
Well, and I think probably every administration does, but you're right. This probably it's gotten a lot more attention, and probably does have a higher percentage of that. Except Kellyanne, of course, she's served very, very, very well. I've met Steve Bannon. I really like him. I think the guy has a brilliance to him about political instinct and calculus. What he's done with these funds, I guess, it won't be challenged in courts until 2021. I don't know that anybody who supports. I haven't met anybody who likes Donald Trump and then has abandoned him because of maybe the circle he's kept. Because you didn't even mention Michael Cohen. I don't think.
Sure.
I mean, this guy, is also in another league. But I don't know that that's sunk down to the rank and file. And I don't believe personally, and I don't think the American people who are in the middle or support him believe that reflects the president. I also don't think that in campaigns, the person who was around during the re-election cycle, except for maybe Jim Baker, who kind of did Reagan and Bush at that time, kind of did multiple elections as kind of the campaign manager. So for Kellyanne Conway not to carry out, I think she's probably got him on a good path, in my opinion.
But you're not concerned about the tax return situation that's been ongoing? I mean, these are pseudo-scandals that could be easily remedied by just saying, hey, these are my tax returns. Why hasn't the president done that, and why doesn't that concern you at all?
I couldn't answer to why he hasn't, and it doesn't concern me at all. I've been hearing tax issues all the way back from Nixon. So, and I'm not sure if I could see how much money he made or didn't make, or what his donations were. I hear he's got a big heart and donates a lot. But I could care less, and I think when they poll that, it's like 3% of the people can care less. Even Democrats who don't like him, I don't think that's the top 10 reasons as to why they don't care for him. But I could care less. I think the goal was to see if Russia is somehow giving him money, but I don't think that he would have that in there. So I don't see that as a big issue at all. I don't see that as a way that he's not going to win. Matter of fact, I actually believe that every time they grab hold of something the next week and it's a news story, that it helps him. I really do. I think every time they attack him, you've got now a group of folks who are just sick of it, and I think there's a lot of independent voters who are going to say, enough is enough. I like the direction this country's going, And that's the position he's got to have us in that mentality 30 to 45 days from right now. I like the direction it's going.
So finally, I want to ask you, obviously you're donating a lot of your time to get the president reelected, but you have a day job, you do other things. You have a super PAC, you have a PAC, a nonprofit. Tell folks about that, these initiatives, and what keeps someone like you engaged when you've been in the political game for such a long time?
Well, the American Patriotic Movement is my 501c3 nonprofit. And way before the pandemic, the presidential elections, and rioting in the streets, in 2019, we decided I wanted to do this, actually in 2018. But we started in motion in 2019. And it was a couple of polls, and you can Google all kinds of polls on where Americans are in their patriotic feeling. And I was just stunned by, I remember in the 80s where they even documented that 96% of all Americans were patriotic. And it's hard to define patriotism. I feel like a patriot, but yet if you cornered me, there's just so many things you can say or not say about American patriotism. Sometimes it comes from within. And today, they see it as 65, 70% or even less than that. And it just angers me. And they go on to say as there's more immigrants coming in, they're less patriotic. And that could be so. I remember when it was a gigantic deal when there was one Indian parade, for example, or a Cinco de Mayo parade. Now, every group, every culture has something every week. And so I don't know that makes people less patriotic, but maybe it does. And so I felt like, and at the same time, you hear about folks talking about that civics isn't taught the way it used to be. And so we thought we'd get together and put together a nonprofit that brings back patriotism from the organic level. And so it's something that I hope will be able to have an impact over the next 10 to 20 years. I know we're running out of time, but the PAC and Super PAC is the American Patriotic Coalition. And it's to support people who are pro-business and love this country and display that at any level. It's not partisan. And it's designed to just promote good school board members and city council members and members of Congress and people that show evidence of that. And so it is a PAC and Super PAC that maybe we can give you the website people can go to as they're watching this, or give us a call.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I love the insight, the context. This man's been on the front lines for a long time, and going to these conventions for decades is no small feat. And it's unfortunate all this stuff is virtual. Because we do enjoy going to these conferences and meeting people like yourself and really getting to get some insight about the political process and why you're choosing to support someone when you could be doing a lot of other things with your time. So I'm really appreciative you came all the way up here to see us.
Absolutely. Thank you. I hope you'll invite me back, and I appreciate that too. I think your outreach is also beyond Indians, so that's great. Make sure I get the feedback and invite me back in a month.
Well, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. David Dhillon, who's part of the Indian Voices for Trump Coalition. I'm Ravi Kapur for our entire team. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time.